I'm Ed Weiscotten, and I'm doing this on behalf of the Social Ministry Committee of our church. I am going to pass around a pad, and it's just informal. If you have any interest in helping in some way with a refugee program, we don't have any major plans, but we want to see if there's some way as a congregation that we can help out. So if you are be willing to get involved in something like that, please put your name on here. So I'll just start it with you, if I may. We're really grateful. We have two speakers here today from Lutheran Social Services. I think you know that that's the organization that, for our Lutheran congregations, that takes responsibility for refugees. And they have a program they'll present. The first one that I will introduce is Hector Colon. He is the president of LSS of Wisconsin Upper Michigan. And some of you probably know we have quite a few offices around Wisconsin and Upper Michigan, so he's the guy on the move. So we'll start with Hector and go from there. Thank you for being here, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So happy to be here with you all today, and it's a really good sign when you can't find a parking spot. I had a parking blocks away, so you could, you know that this is a special place. And although I can't see your smiling faces, I can see the glow in your eyes and the joy that exists here at this church. So thank you again for having us here today. So we want to talk about our Refugee Services. Lutheran Social Services has been running a refugee service program since 1974, and having served over 10,000 refugees during that time. And we were challenged a couple years ago because the prior administration reduced substantially the number of refugees that were coming into our country. And when that happened, there were many resettlement agencies across the country that ended up closing shop, and because it was hard to sustain the program. We had some discussions about the program, and the leadership at LSS, our board of directors, the bishops, people from the community encouraged us to continue to keep the program. And what we had to do is kind of right-size the program a little bit. It was really hard to do that because once you get individuals, you have to continue to serve them for up to 5 years. But we tried to do a little bit of that. It was a little hard. But then we relied on our partners to really support us so that we can make sure that this program was sustainable and we could do a great job that we have historically done over the many years. And we were able to do that. So then when the new administration comes in, prior we were serving about 100 refugees on an annual basis. But now the new administration comes in, he lifted the cap and brought us back to serving about 300 refugees on an annual basis, which is what we were doing historically. So the organization had to redevelop our infrastructure, get ready, got a lot of support from the community to be able to serve that new number of 300. On top of that, now we got the Afghanistan crisis. So LSS raised our hands right away to be able to help that population. And Mary Flynn, who's our fearless leader in the refugee program, was called to go to Virginia to meet with other leaders across the country to see how we were going to safely serve these individuals in the United States of America. So Mary Flynn has been involved from the very beginning, and we are so thankful for that. You know, our mission is to act compassionately, serve humbly, and lead courageously. And I have to say that our mission has been lived out through this program, especially now more than ever, raising our hands to serve these individuals that were fleeing from war in persecution, individuals with we heard the stories, just really tragic situations in their country. So it's a true honor to be in a position where we can live out our mission and really serve these individuals. We have raised our hands initially to serve 100 individuals, and it was contingent upon fundraising. Fundraising has gone very well, so we are now saying that we want to serve an additional 100 people, which is a blessing. The church, the congregations, individuals in the community. We have had over 1,000 donors. Over 80% of those donors are new donors to LSS. And combined, we've raised $660,000 to be able to serve refugees in a matter of a few months. We still need to raise more to be able to serve the additional individuals that we said we'd want to serve. So please help us, spread the word for those that might be interested to continue to support the organization so that we can continue to serve more. Lastly, I just want to share with you a little bit about the refugee program, and Sarah's going to go really in depth in this, but this is so impressive. These individuals come with $1,200 one time from the federal government. Within 90 days, we get their children enrolled in school, get them connected to an apartment, get them connected to a job, help them get connected so that they can learn English and the laws. And many of them within 90 days, that's enough. Some of them will require a little bit more. That's why our fundraising efforts help so that we can pay rent for a period of time until they're fully employed and independent. But it's so impressive how fast these individuals become independent, successful, productive members of society, and end up loving the United States of America. So I just wanted to share that with you. This new population, there's some differences. Many of the normal refugees come with visas, and so they're able to work quickly. Some of these individuals might be in the process of obtaining their visas, which requires us to be able to raise money so that we can help them pay their rent until they get that job. But once these individuals are given an opportunity and just a little bit of assistance here from us in Lutheran Social Services, these are wonderful people that are fully integrate into our society and end up loving the United States of America. So again, we're so proud that we could be able to serve in this capacity, and we're so thankful for all of you and this church who has been big supporters of LSS over the years. We thank you for your support. We thank you for your prayers, and thank you for being here today.
And thank you for being here today.
Well done.
Okay, the second person I'd like to introduce to you is Sarah Halstead, who is a staff member at LSS. She can tell you more what she's going to, you've got a video program, I believe, don't you?
PowerPoint here,
about the refugees. So, Sarah, thank you for being here.
Thank you. This off. Good morning, everybody. So happy to be here with you today. I'll just start by saying I am a preacher's kid. My father was an ELCA pastor, and because I have it in my genes, I'm going to stick to my notes so that we end on time. I want to make sure that we answer all your questions, share a little bit with you today about the refugee program and specifically what's happening in Afghanistan. And as Hector alluded, this is such an important ministry, and we're so blessed to have your partnership and your support in this. So thank you so much. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through what I call the ABCs of refugee resettlement. And as we do that, I want to let you know that this stands for awareness and belonging and community. Now we're also going to give you a little bonus Q&A at the end so that we can answer any questions that you might have. And as Hector mentioned, we are Lutheran Social Services of Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. And we're an organization that has actually been doing resettlement of refugees for more than 40 years. In that time, we have resettled more than 10,000 refugees. And our mission is to act compassionately, serve humbly, and lead courageously. Hector, as I mentioned, and as you met, is our CEO, our president and CEO. I'm the church relations liaison. I get to work with all the congregations across Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. And as Hector mentioned earlier, Mary Flynn is the program manager that works with our refugee program. And I'm going to tell you that everything I'm sharing with you this morning, I literally have learned from Mary in the last 2 or 3 months. So she is a wealth of information. So let's go ahead and start the ABCs. And A starts and stands for awareness. And by learning more about refugee resettlement and sharing that knowledge with other people that we know, we're all better equipped to be able to share God's love and be a supportive community in many different effective ways. It also can help us to stop the spread of misinformation and stigma, which also sometimes goes along with this. And I think that one of the very best ways to learn is to ask questions. So let's go ahead and start with a few of those. So what exactly are refugees? Well, sometimes people get terms like refugees and asylees and immigrants confused. And this confusion can lead to a lot of bad feelings about groups of people because they're kind of misunderstood. And when you add to that confusion that the rest of the world uses the word refugee differently than we do here in the United States, it really makes things complicated. So let's try to learn together. Refugees are distinctly different from asylees and immigrants. And I think those differences can be summed up and generalized into a 1, 2, 3 summary. Immigrants are people who voluntarily leave their homeland and they legally resettle in another country. Asylees also leave their homeland, but they're requesting protection and safe haven in a second country. And refugees are driven from their homeland, usually while they're fleeing violence or war. They seek safety in a second country, but then they're resettled in a third country. Now, as I mentioned, that term refugee means something different in the rest of the world than it does to us in the U.S. In the U.S., a refugee is somebody who has already been admitted to the U.S. They've already passed several screenings, including health checks and background checks, security checks. In the rest of the world, that term refugee really stands for somebody who's seeking refuge. But we call those asylees or asylum seekers. And a refugee in the U.S. is somebody who has already received refuge. And just a note, the program at LSS serves both refugees and asylees. So what exactly is refugee resettlement? Well, it is a humanitarian effort between the United States and the United Nations. After World War II, the United Nations started to define exactly what refugees are. And at that time, the United States began to make a commitment to take refugees every year. So how does LSS fit into all of this? Well, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked. Traditionally, refugees flee their country and they make their way to a United Nations refugee camp or refugee center, like the one that you see in this photo here, in another country that's safe. And this picture actually shows a camp in Kenya. And interestingly enough, Kakuma is not the name of a city. It's actually a word that means nowhere. And if you can think about what it must feel like to be at a refugee camp, that word can sort of sum that up a little bit. The United Nations then conducts interviews to determine eligibility for refugee status and protection with the people at the camps. And if they are given refugee status, then a case may be selected for resettlement in a third country. Now, the International Organization for Migration, also called the IOM, is a part of the United Nations system, and they decide which cases go where, and they help to coordinate that travel to the final destination countries. Please note that refugees do not always have a choice in where they will be resettled. The choice they have is whether they're going to go when they're able to go or stay with an uncertain and sometimes very dangerous future. Now, if they are assigned to the United States, then they go through a process to be cleared by us before they arrive. The United States Department of State, Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, also called PRM, works in partnership with 9 voluntary resettlement agencies. And Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service is one of those 9. And LSS, or Lutheran Social Services, is the local resettlement agency that's affiliated with LIRS. Now, local resettlement agencies like us, we have our job start at the airport when that refugee arrives. We don't actually go out and try to find refugees. We don't get to handpick them or anything like that. And before the refugees come to us, typically that process has taken between 18 and 36 months. Now, it is important to know that when they arrive, refugees have permanent, legal, documented status. So they can go rent an apartment, they can get a bus pass, they can sign their kids up for school, they can get a job. They are eligible for any of the benefits and services that any resident of Wisconsin would be eligible for, except for voting privileges. That comes after they pass their citizenship test, which they need to do within 5 years of arriving. The goal of refugee resettlement is self-sufficiency. Refugees are expected to become self-sufficient and not be dependent on communities or churches, on agencies, etc. And when we say that they are self-sufficient, this means that they are working, they're paying their own expenses. If they didn't know English before, they're learning English. They're obeying all the laws that we have in Wisconsin or in the United States. All the guidelines that we would have expected of anyone else living here, they would do. So LSS Refugee Resettlement provides a number of different services. As Hector mentioned, during that first 30 to 90 days, there are required core services that we offer, and that includes that intensive welcome, integration into the community, and a number of connections to various resources. And then for the first year, we have case management with them. Now, this could be longer if we needed to, if there's a special circumstance or it's a very complex case, that case management can go on longer. But then we are available to them for up to 5 years from when they arrive. So if they have other questions and they come back to us with things. For example, when we had this crisis with COVID, some of the refugees that were already quite self-sufficient got back in touch with us and said, whoa, my job has changed, or I don't know what to do with this. And so we're there and available for them. We have employment programs that help to promote that earliest self-sufficiency for them. And also there's that cultural orientation. We have ESL classes, learning English if they don't know that. And we have time where they can come in and talk with us, either by appointment or within walk-in hours where they don't have to have an appointment. And then, of course, if there's emergencies, we're there for that kind of assistance. For example, one family experienced the death of one of their family members, and where do you go to take care of that? That's kind of an emergency. So we're able to help with some of those things. Now, this is really wonderful. This is a great example of how one refugee is using his God-given gifts to serve. This is Omar. And he does always have a smile on his face like that, in case you're wondering. He actually was a refugee in that camp that I showed earlier, the Kakuma camp, and he came from Somalia. He now is working with LSS. He's one of our program managers, or program supervisors. And here he was helping to prepare a Thanksgiving meal for someone one year. Now, the current situation in Afghanistan presents us with some very immediate and urgent needs. And a lot of people are most interested in refugee resettlement because of that. Due to the evacuation of so many individuals so quickly this fall, there's a mix of situations. Some of the Afghans are refugees who were already in the process of coming here. Some of those individuals worked with us, with the U.S. in the past 20 years. Maybe they assisted with our military, for example. But now they were facing persecution in Afghanistan because of that connection. Normally, getting them here would have taken up to 18 months, but as we know from the news early this fall, that happened in just a matter of weeks. And some of the people are not what we would term refugees by definition, as I explained earlier, but rather those who are seeking asylum. And generally, they would not have been eligible for a lot of the benefits that we described earlier. So from the beginning, LSS was working on preparing for those greater needs. A lot of the people did not speak English. As soon as they received their work authorization cards, LSS Refugee Resettlement staff will work closely with them to be able to find permanent and stable employment. However, we do know that it could take considerable time before they're authorized to work in the U.S. and have the skills that are needed for those jobs. So normally LSS receives pass-through funding from our National Resettlement Affiliate, LIRS, as Hector mentioned, in the amount of $1,225 for each case. And those dollars must be spent on the immediate shelter and safety needs for those Afghans. So things like housing, food, winter clothing, car seats, utilities, phones, etc. And at first it sounded like they were not going to be eligible for that kind of funding, and so those were going to need to be secured through private donations. There was some strong advocacy, and I want to say it was right around the beginning of October on a national level. It did pass that they then were going to receive some of those benefits. It was about that time that LSS was able to say, I think we can take on additional cases based on the benefits that we know that they would be having. So we were really happy to see that approved. And incidentally, there's currently some legislation that's being considered by our Congress, which would allow those refugees to have, or those people coming from Afghanistan to have that full refugee status. Right now, they have to go and apply for asylum. They're here on a temporary visa, but they have to apply for asylum, a process that means that they have to go to Chicago, to go to court, to go through this process, meaning travel, extra time. What it really means for them is they have much more of an uncertain future, adding to the stress that's already in their lives after coming here after so much trauma. So that's pending, and we hope that that will pass as well. But we know that the Afghans that are here now are eligible for benefits like W-2 if they have children, food share, Badger Care, and refugee cash assistance for up to 8 months. But again, we know that it could take a lot longer for them to become employed, so it may take longer for them than usual with the support that they may need. Well, we covered a lot with A, so let's move on to B. B actually stands for belonging, and I think part of what makes LSS's resettlement program so successful is that we create a very good sense of belonging for each new refugee who arrives. We don't have to look any further than Luke chapter 10 and the parable of the Good Samaritan to hear about how Jesus wants us to be able to treat our neighbors and in caring for others. And as Christians, we want to help. And boy, I can tell you, over the past few months, we've had an outpouring of help from all different kinds of people. And that has been so wonderful. Now, our goal at Refugee Resettlement is to get people into their permanent home as quickly as possible. And that's a little bit different than being a guest in someone else's home. Sometimes we would hear from people saying, I got an extra bedroom, I could take an Afghan. It's a little bit different than that. Typically, we pick up those refugees at the airport and we take them right to their own home that's already been furnished with everything that they need, the basics to get started. So there would be toiletries, kitchen items, linens, cleaning supplies, furniture, and some of the most comforting things, maybe a little culturally appropriate food, just to get them started, the basics. And the collection of supplies like this is a wonderful way for us to be able to help someone feel like they belong. Now, volunteers at the Refugee Resettlement Program also help to create a sense of belonging in a variety of ways. They might serve as a cultural mentor to help people get used to life here in the U.S., or maybe provide transportation for a refugee to the doctors or something until they can get their own. You can help prepare that home before they arrive, getting it all cleaned and ready for them. Or assist with grocery shopping. I don't know how many of you have ever gone to the grocery store when they've changed where things are in different aisles and you feel like, oh, I don't even know where I'm going. Imagine it's the first time you go to that grocery store. How do you know where to find things? Just having somebody with you can help. Maybe a volunteer would help by being part of that welcoming group at the airport when they get here. Or they might help to organize a community drive for some of the supplies that are needed to put in that home. These are just a few examples of the ways that individual volunteers can help. And some of those really do require close proximity to Milwaukee here and might require some background checks if you're working directly with the Afghans, but others do not. Some of those can be done from a distance, like helping to tutor in ESL. We can use Zoom or other kinds of virtual ways to reach somebody and help with some of those things. Now, another very special way of creating that sense of belonging is to be a co-sponsor for a refugee family. And working together with LSS through the Refugee Resettlement team, co-sponsor groups can help with everything from furnishing an apartment to checking in daily to seeing how that family is going and just really being a good neighbor. There is a financial component to being a co-sponsor, helping to provide that support so that we know that they have the money to help cover that shelter and the basic needs until they're able to become self-sufficient. And lastly, the last part of the ABCs is C, which stands for community. And I think that builds on awareness and belonging. The same way that we support families who are making their new homes in the U.S., we want to make sure that we build that sense of community and the support structure as well. We know we're going to learn from one another. What works well for one congregation as a co-sponsor may help another one. And what helps and maybe benefits one family might help another family. So we want to create that partnership model where we share that information and help each other along the way to really create that strong sense of community overall. We know that Christ tells us we're many parts to one body, and we need every single part of that body to recognize the diverse experiences that we all have and allow each one of us to be able to grow in love. And I think by recognizing that infinite worth in each part of that body of Christ, including those new refugees and the asylees, we certainly will experience people using their God-given gifts to serve. So we've done a lot with the ABCs. That's a quick overview, kind of a Reader's Digest version of the process. But I want to be able to answer some questions that you might have so that we can make this more meaningful for you. Yes?
I would think language would be the biggest hurdle to overcome. How long does it take for them to convert from their former language to our language and be working in the community and know where the groceries are at and all that stuff?
So excellent question, asking about the barrier of language, anticipating that could be very troublesome. What does that mean? How long does it take for somebody to be able to speak enough English to get a job, to go to the grocery store, to be able to handle things? Really, really good question. So even if you have gone to the doctor's office, you might have noticed something on the wall with lots of different languages on it. If you need help, there are certain services that do require that there be a translator, someone that can interpret, so that you understand completely what's going on. And in those cases, of course, we would be working with interpreters. But many of the times, we find that language immersion is really important. In today's day and age, when we're connected to the internet, it's very easy. Imagine you were simply planted in the middle of Russia tomorrow. You probably know how to connect either through your phone or through a computer where you could find the local news here and know what's going on in Milwaukee and what the temperature is and hear things in English, and you'd be able to pick up your phone and talk to other people in English and actually use English in your home a lot. So the only time you'd actually speak Russian would be when you have to go out, right? So it is important for people to practice and try and be immersed in the language to be able to learn. Children learn very quickly. Their brains are wired for language. So once they're integrated into the school system, kids tend to pick it up faster. It can take a little bit longer for an adult, but definitely knowing the basic phrases is that first step.
Is that measured in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months?
So it depends on the individual. It depends on their skills. Some of them know some English, some don't know any at all. There's a lot of variables there. But I would say that people, in the past, refugees that have come to us have become fully self-sufficient within 6 months. So they've learned enough to be able to get a job. We work hard with local employers and places to be able to offer to them an occupation that's going to work, in a work situation that's going to work for them. So we may know of employers that are willing to have jobs that maybe you don't need to do a lot of, you don't have to be completely fluent in English as long as you understand enough. So again, there's a lot of variables there, but there's a lot of services. In fact, volunteers who help with that English language learning usually start with a few basics. Your name, your phone number, your address. And if a volunteer accompanies the Afghan to, or a refugee to the doctor's office for an appointment, you know they're going to ask, what is your name? What is your date of birth? Can you tell me, what time is your appointment? So we as volunteers would not give that information. We would say, Omar, tell them your name. They want your phone number. They would speak it, they would practice, they would do this, and then they're able to do that on their own soon. Great question. Yeah.
You had mentioned that it's about 18 to 30 or 18 to 24 months before you receive refugees. Is that right?
So you asked about the 18 to 24 or 36 months before they come to us. Generally speaking, that's how long they're in one of those resettlement camps or places in that second country before they come to us. Most people are kind of familiar with Fort McCoy, and let me just answer a little bit about that, because that's right here in Wisconsin. It is sort of a temporary substitute for what would happen in a second country with that refugee resettlement process. So they are doing in a much quicker fashion what would normally happen in one of those camps. Now, Fort McCoy is here in Wisconsin. We hear it because it's in the news because it's right here. It is the largest of those resettlement camps that are here in the U.S. right now for Afghans, and it is bigger than the next 3 combined. It is huge. Not everybody that's in Fort McCoy is going to end up in Wisconsin. Right now, we think that about 800 Afghan refugees will be resettled in the next year in Wisconsin. Again, those are based on numbers that people have been able to give, like LSS saying we think we can help, we have the capacity to fully and well and help people, this number. But they're going to be resettled all across the United States. So just because they're in Fort McCoy now, they could end up in another state later, and most of them will. Yeah, did that answer the question about the time?
Yeah, and then they have 5 years from the time they arrive or are resettled from that camp to become citizens? Is that right? Or?
Yeah, you have 5 years to pass the citizenship test. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but I used to work as a director of a literacy council, and I also taught ESL for several years and helped, back when the Hmong were coming here to the United States, I helped a lot of the Hmong elders learn English and be able to pass that citizenship test. If you've ever looked at the questions that they ask on that, there's like 50 or 100 questions that they could possibly ask you, and they're just going to randomly pick them, and then you have to give the right answer to that. It's very interesting. But I don't know that many Americans know all the answers to those questions. So there's a process involved there, but the support through tutoring, through helping to learn, whether it be through LSS staff or whether it's volunteers or other local literacy councils or partner organizations that we have, yes, they do have up to 5 years, and after that time, that's when it kind of expires, if you will. Yeah. Yes. Question.
Okay, for those who are being settled in Milwaukee or the Milwaukee area, and I congratulate you on putting housing first. With our shortage of housing, where are you finding these units that can, support a family and that are affordable and habitable and where they can stay for a while?
You just hit the nail on the head. Her question was about housing, and she said, "Thank you for putting housing first at LSS as we look at this resettlement process." How do you find housing that's affordable, that's in a livable place, that that we can do this? That is a challenge. I will tell you, not only in Milwaukee, but everywhere that we are looking. Housing is a critical need. And what we want is something that's sustainable for them, that is permanent, that they're going to be able to afford. So sometimes people will say, well, I know of this place that's available. Will a refugee be able to afford that rent as they get their job and be able to live there? It is a challenge, and this is where all of you come into play, because the network of people that can help us makes us more effective. Let's think about this for a second. If you were looking for an apartment and you went looking for a place, what are you likely to encounter? We would like you to fill out an application. Please give us your name, give us your employment background for the last 5 years. I'd like to know where you lived for the last 7 years. And now we're looking at an Afghan who's been at Fort McCoy for a few months. We don't have that information. But if you know a landlord, if you know somebody personally who's working with housing or owns a place, and you're able to say, our congregation is working with LSS as they're resettling Afghan refugees and asylees. Would you be willing to work with us? Would you be willing to have a lease for a year that we could sublet out to families? There might be a family that's here for 6 months. They might move on, but that would leave that 1-year lease open for the next group to come in if they're available. Would you allow us a few days if the refugee is going to sign that lease? Give them 2 or 3 days from when they get here to actually sign, but could we get in there and get it ready for them? Because they're coming with nothing. And if you know somebody, that's so much stronger than if we call them up out of the blue and say, hey, could you help us with this? That personal connection is so, so valuable. So that's where we really, really appreciate the help that we can get from anybody who knows, hey, my Aunt Nancy had a house, she passed away, it's sitting vacant right now, it's got 5 bedrooms, we haven't put it on the market. Is this something we could use for refugee resettlement? Connections, it's all connections. So if you've got a lead, if you drive by a neighborhood that you think this would probably work well, they've got a for rent sign, copy down the number, give us a call, let us know. We're really trying to do everything we can to find exactly what you talked about.
Follow-up question. So are there families who could be moved that aren't because housing is not available?
Her question was, are there families who could be moved that aren't because housing is not available? Right now, it is very much you build it and they will come model. So I would say the short answer is yes. Sometimes our co-sponsors say, well, we need to know what kind of family is coming so we know what kind of apartment or what kind of house to find for it. The opposite is actually true right now. If you can find a 3-bedroom apartment, we will find somebody that can use a 3-bedroom apartment. If you've got a house with 5 bedrooms, great. If you've got a 1-bedroom, whatever you can find, we'll be able to find somebody that fits that. Now again, we don't go out and look for it, but we can tell that state refugee coordinator, we've got housing that looks like this. Have you got anybody that could use it? We make that connection. They say, we've got a case that would fit well there. And then we move from there. Yes?
With the shortage of employees everywhere in the country, everyone is hiring. I'm assuming that is something once, especially if you already have people who speak some English, that you've got a coordinator who's already looking where they're going to go to match up skills with needs, because it seems that everyone needs help, and
Yes.
this might be filling in something that's really needed.
Yeah, excellent question. So she raised the issue of employment. Everybody's hiring that we know of, right? We all know there's a lot of openings places in different places, and could this help to meet that need? The answer is yes, and I got a lot of employers that reached out to me in the last several months. I'm one of the people that answers our email at LSS, which is church.relations@lsswis.org, and people write with any kind of question related to the refugee crisis right now. A lot of employers reached out, and we have a person on the refugee resettlement staff who specifically works with employers and places people. And again, sometimes we got a lot of calls from people that maybe were looking for something that the refugees weren't the match for, because maybe, again, we don't know until they get here, but maybe they've got limited English, maybe they don't have certain skills that are needed. But once we know what skills they have and what they can do, and we've got that list of employers, we can then do a good job of matching to be able to get that employment for them. Yes?
I would guess that being a refugee almost by definition means that you've been through a lot of trauma. And I'm wondering about refugees' mental health and what that looks like. Because I understand the jump in, learn the language, get an apartment, get a job, but there's probably a lot of trauma there too.
Yes, yes. Thank you. What a great question. So she asked, it seems like by definition, refugee also has accompanying trauma for the person who's experienced that situation. And in addition to jump in, get a job, get going, what do we do with the realization that they've been through so much, and how do we operate? LSS has been working through a model that we call trauma-informed care for quite some time. We have almost 140-year history with our organization, and we have a very strong mental health component with many different programs that deal specifically with mental health. But all of our programs work with this idea of trauma-informed care. People that come to us, regardless of what the situation is, have gone through a lot. And we want to make sure that we don't re-injure them. And what I mean by that is that you can actually measure in the brain when there's been mental trauma. It's like an injury, and we don't want to re-traumatize or hurt that person in the way that we work with them. So things happen, although I'm speaking to you with a lot of enthusiasm very quickly, and we're talking about let's go, our staff is very patient. And we understand that first and foremost, when they get off the plane, they are tired. They are probably hungry. They just want to get something to eat and settle down in a place where they're not being shuffled and just relax, for a few days. In fact, sometimes those co-sponsor organizations or congregations are eager to get in there and do stuff, and we have to say, hold on just a bit. We got to let them just settle for, a little bit. Let them sleep. Let them sleep in their own bed, for a night or two before we move in and do more things. But definitely we're working with those mental health needs and concerns. And I think that 40-year history of refugee resettlement, regardless of whether that person has come from Afghanistan or any other country, they have gone through a lot. They have fled war, persecution. There definitely is trauma associated with that. So our staff is very used to working with that trauma and being able to support them, connect them with the right kind of services, regardless of their age, their background, and be able to get them that kind of help and support if it's needed in specialized ways, but also in just how we operate generally. So thank you for that question. Yes?
What kind of Afghan resources are there in Milwaukee? Thinking mental health, translation, that, can help connect.
Sure. She asked what kind of resources are available in Milwaukee that can help with translation or connection to various things. I actually might defer to Hector if he knows of some of them, because he lives in Milwaukee. I traveled from Wapaka this morning, so I live in central Wisconsin. I'm not as familiar with Milwaukee, but I can tell you that in that history, we've connected with a lot of different resources. But Hector, I'll see if you know some of those answers.
Sure. So generally speaking, our staff really work with a variety of different community-based organizations to ensure that we get all the resources we can have to help with these individuals becoming as independently as possible, as quickly as possible. So that's part of what we do, is connect the individuals to other resources. So I would say that in Milwaukee in particular, there's lots of resources, lots of different organizations that we bring in to help with the population that we serve. Whether it be English, mental health. Again, we do a lot of the mental health services for them, the trauma, housing. It's really a lot of providers that we work with in order to make sure that we serve this population.
To follow up on Barbara's question, do you work pretty closely with the Islamic Center?
Yep.
I mean, this may be it's a conception of mine that they're mostly Muslim, if they're practicing religion at all, and so that would be a connection religiously and culturally, perhaps, that they'd be comforted and assisted by.
Definitely. Religion is an important component of many people's lives, so we'd like to make sure that we connect them to those faith-based groups that are core to their hearts, and also communities that might have individuals that come from similar backgrounds, to connect them close to those individuals so that they can feel a sense of community, they can communicate, and really are provided with the support that they need as quickly as possible to help them feel integrated into Milwaukee.
I just wanted to add another comment about the Muslim question. Yes, we do work closely with a number of individuals, and we have some diversity even on our staff to be able to support some of that as well. But I think Bishop Erickson here in Milwaukee really put it the best of everybody that I've heard. And he talked about the support of congregations in this ministry, and he talked about how we don't do this because they are Christians, we do this because we are Christians. And he also cautioned congregations to say that, you know, if you are co-sponsoring a family, for example, please do not look at this as your opportunity to be recruiting, that you want them to join, that you quickly need to baptize them and get them members of your congregation. That's not the intent here. Our intent is to serve and to honor that. We know, just as when we've gone through traumatic experiences, our faith is tremendously helpful in dealing with that trauma. And so we want to make sure that they have access to their support through their faith in a way that works well for them too.
Maybe one more question then
Okay.
we'll have to end.
Why? Because it's that time.
One more, I think I saw a hand over here unless there's another.
I was just going to ask, how common is it for a refugee or refugee family to struggle to become self-sufficient? What's your success rate?
How common is it for the refugees to become successful? Do they struggle with that? I recently heard our program manager cite, and I can't remember what the past number of years was, if it was 7, I have to go back and see, that of the refugees that had come to us, we had a 100% success rate within 6 months of them being self-sufficient.
That's fantastic.
Now, that's before the Afghan refugee factored in, and we know that there's some special circumstances. It may take them a little bit longer. We've just started to receive them. I mean, literally just in the last month have we started to see the Afghans actually coming. We knew they were coming. It was getting ready for them, and then now we started to see them come. So I can't tell you going forward, but I can tell you that our history, our approach, our experience has been that we're very, very successful in getting them to be self-sufficient. So we anticipate that that would continue. We want to continue with the best practice, and we know that together, working with all the congregations and all of the different support through the community, that's really what makes this happen.
Wonderful.
That's really what makes this happen.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to say thank you to both of you. And, you have been very informative and helpful.
Well, thank you.
Well done.
And of course, you're welcome to stay and talk further with them if you want. Also, I'd like to know where that pad is with names of anybody that might be interested in working. Has that gone around to everybody?
You got it right over here.
There is a pad if you have an interest in helping. We don't know yet what we might do as a congregation, but if we can get involved in some way, it'd be nice to know who would be the first people that we could call on for some help. So if you want to pass that on further or look for the pad or talk to them. And so many thanks, and you have been very, very helpful, really, in my estimation. So thank you all for being here as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good seeing you. Thank you for joining us.